Much of Gazan Palestinian society has been deeply brainwashed by a perverse ideology that has created a death cult. Hi, I'm Robert Stearns, and thank you for tuning in to this week's Israel Frontline Update. If it's the first time you're joining us, I've been traveling to Israel and the greater Middle East for the past 32 years. I don't work for any government. I don't work for any educational institution, a university, or a journalistic institution. I am a pastor, a spiritual pilgrim, and try to bring just my lived experience, what I have seen, what I have heard, to add to the pool of meaning that all of us, I hope, are trying to get so that we can understand and hopefully move towards some type of resolution of this conflict in the Middle East. The issue of unrest around Jerusalem and the Middle East goes back literally centuries, but certainly in our day and time, it is as potent and as strong as ever. So thank you for joining. And I hope that if you find this helpful, that you will like and share and comment. Drop in the comments who you are, where you're watching from, because there is a global, worldwide family, specifically of Christians, who are really finding the need to become more educated and to understand the complexities and the nuances of the situation regarding Israel and the greater Middle East. But we start this week with a story from Germany. Of all places, Germany, this story is both deeply disturbing and filled with hope at the same time. There was a massive pro-Palestinian protest in Munich, Germany, and they specifically targeted the route of this protest to walk by a synagogue, a Jewish synagogue. Now let me pause here for a second, and I want to draw an analogy. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's in the ballpark, and I'd like you to think it through for a moment. We have a war going on right now between Russia and Ukraine. And in America, and in Europe for certain, largely speaking, I'm speaking in generalities, largely speaking, Russia is seen as the aggressor, and Ukraine is seen as defending its territory and defending itself from this Russian invasion. And yet, has anyone heard anything happening in America or in Europe of Russian churches, Russian Orthodox churches being attacked? I haven't. Has anyone heard of people of Russian descent in America or Europe being openly attacked on the streets simply because they're Russian? I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I certainly have not seen it in any of the headlines. Have you seen any Russian businesses, Russian restaurants, Russian grocery stores, Russian places of business? Have you seen them attacked, their windows smashed? I've heard of nothing. Again, the analogy is not perfect. And by the way, we could draw that analogy to many conflicts. We could draw that to the conflict recently between India and Pakistan that was going on. We could draw that to the many different regional conflicts around the world. But seemingly, only the Jewish people and Jewish businesses and Jewish day schools and Jewish houses of worship are attacked simply for being Jewish. So when there are other regional conflicts that happen around the world, those of us in the other parts of the world, we see it. We may draw a conclusion on one side or the other, but none of us then say that everyone who is of that ethnic descent, fill in the blank, Russian, or if you're on the side of the Russian, Ukrainian, Pakistani, Indian, whatever it is, none of us say, well, every Pakistani in the world is to blame, or every Russian is to blame. And yet it is the Jewish people whose day schools are being attacked, whose synagogues are being attacked, whose places of businesses are being attacked, and Jews who are being attacked in the public square all around the world. This is the point where things move past a regional conflict into a place that this is anti-Semitism. This isn't an issue of an opinion about a war that is happening. Everybody's entitled to their opinion about a war that's happening. And frankly, my first opinion is war is horrible. War is hell. War is awful. It is destructive. It is the place of last resort. As Christians, we should be peacemakers at all costs, almost all costs, because there does come a line where we have a responsibility to be ethical and to be moral. Peacekeeping is not passive. Peacekeeping requires that we take a stand. So again, the analogy is not perfect, but listen what happened in Germany. So there's this huge pro-Palestinian protest, and they specifically targeted it to go by the synagogue. And that's the point I'm making, to intimidate, to harass these Jewish citizens. These are not necessarily citizens of Israel. These are Jewish citizens in Germany. And protesters are shouting out death to the IDF. And they marched past the synagogue right at the beginning of the Friday night Shabbat service. Interesting timing. While this community is going to prayer, while this community is gathering peacefully, intimidation. However, thankfully, hundreds of German citizens formed a human chain around the synagogue, held hands, formed a human chain, and stood in solidarity to keep these protesters at a distance. One of them was a nun, and she wore a yellow hostage pin, and she was part of the human chain. And she stated, "Standing by the side of our Jewish brothers and sisters is the least that we can do in the face of such hatred and incitement on the streets of Germany." How horrific, specifically in Germany. Can you imagine being a Jew in Germany and seeing this rise again? It's extraordinary. And I hope this analogy helps you to understand this crossover issue of where it is one thing to have an opinion on a political entity. By the way, I don't always agree with America's foreign policy. I don't always agree with America's military actions. There's military actions that I think are perhaps unwarranted or unwise. That's part of being a citizen, both of a country and a global citizen, is having a perspective on these things. That's a difference from allowing this to bleed over into a hatred and a vilifying of a particular people group, specifically the Jews. July 18th, Israel has expressed deep sorrow after an accidental strike of Gaza's only Catholic church, which killed 3 people. It's a very pointed example of where immediately when this happened, the government launched an investigation, went in to see what was happening. There was a conversation. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu called Pope Leo and expressed sorrow that this had happened and affirmed, he said, Israel deeply regrets this issue of stray ammunition that hit the church, and that Israel is doing everything they can to limit destruction of property and the loss of life. This is the difference, folks, between one side and the other. No one has called Israel after indiscriminate rocket fire happens constantly and lands wherever. And so I'm back to my first comments. War is hell. War is awful. And right now, Israel is absolutely determined. And again, I would offer to you, please put this in context. Israel left Gaza in 2005. And since 2005, not dozens, not hundreds, not thousands, tens of thousands of rockets have been shot at Israel since 2005. And Israel sat there. And year after year after year, Israel endured it. And thank God they have the Iron Dome, and thank God the vast majority of those rockets didn't get through. But every time that alarm sounded, those children have to run to bomb shelters. You grow up knowing that there are people wanting your destruction a few hundred yards away. And Israel endured it all the way until October the 7th. There comes a point where people say enough is enough. And this is the point that Israel is at. They will not tolerate Hamas at their doorstep. And tragically, we have a population in Gaza that has been deeply brainwashed by Hamas ideology. Not all of them, certainly, and we certainly have seen Gazans begin to rise up and begin to speak out against Hamas, but much of Gazan Palestinian society has been deeply brainwashed by a perverse ideology that has created a death cult that is just death to Israel at all costs. And Israel will no longer tolerate that on their southern border. Am I deeply, deeply concerned over the loss of life? Of course I am. Do I want this ended as quickly as possible? Of course we do. Am I tired of being vilified as a heartless, careless person who does not care about Palestine? Yes, I hate that. But I have to be truthful to what I have witnessed. And what I have witnessed are countless Israelis, moms and dads, who say, I've been in their homes. Oh, my son, he's leaving for Gaza in the morning. He's got to do his next month of service, not knowing if they're coming home, praying that this war ends soon. I've talked to soldier after soldier after soldier after soldier who have told me stories of how they heroically seek to save Palestinian lives in the midst of conflict. Does that mean that there aren't bad rogue soldiers? Of course not. There are in every army of the world. Guess what? Humanity is broken and fallen and messed up. This should not surprise us. But on the whole, if you will take the time to more deeply understand the complexities and the nuances of this conflict, what you will find is this: the people, the nations, the ideologies surrounding Israel, many of them, not all, many of them are absolutely committed to genocide. They're actually calling for genocide. Are you going to find a small fringe group here and there that put out radical statements? Of course you are. Again, folks, human beings. Like, have you not learned this by now? There are extremist Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Jews and Christians and every other group on the planet. So stop propping up a group that represents a tiny minority and saying that that is equal to what we know are millions upon millions upon millions who have been brainwashed in a radicalized Islam. How do we know that? Because they have produced suicide bombers year after year after year after year, all the way into October 7th, that those militants who crossed over, I think it was a couple thousand, they knew that was a suicide mission. And they gleefully did it because of the brainwashing of their ideologies. Don't draw an equivalence between these two things. It's not true. Stop lying to yourself. Stop believing lies. The reality is that on the whole, Israel is a society that is longing simply for peace with its neighbors. And that's why you and I have to continue to educate ourselves on the truth and to continue to pray and to work for the peace of Jerusalem. I'll see you next week on the Israel Frontline Update.